Hello and welcome back. You're watching Parry This. Today we are continuing our series on the Crusades. This time we are bringing you part 2 of our complete summary of the Knights Templar. If you haven't watched part 1, I strongly suggest that you do, because it is in that video that we discuss their founding, involvement in the Crusades, and their turn to banking, as well as all their background information. In this video, we will pick up where we left off, and start with the decline of this once great order. So let's just dive on in and get back into the world of the Temple Knights. Their success attracted the concern of many other orders, with the two most powerful rivals being the Knights Hospitaller, or the Knights of Malta, and the Teutonic Knights. Various nobles also had concerns about the Templars as well, both for financial reasons and nervousness about the independent army that was able to move freely through all borders. The long-famed military acumen of the Templars began to stumble in the 1180s. On July 4th, 1187, came the disastrous Battle of Horns of Hattin, a turning point in the Crusades. It again involved Saladin, who had been beaten back by the Templars in 1177, in the legendary Battle of Montesquieu near Tiberias, but this time Saladin was better prepared. Further, the Grand Master of the Templars was involved in this battle, Gerard de Riedefort, who had just achieved that lifetime position a few years earlier. He was not known as a good military strategist, and made some deadly errors, such as venturing out with his force of 80 knights without adequate supplies or water, under the devastating desert sun. The Templars were overcome by the desert heat within a day, and then they were surrounded and massacred by Saladin's army. Riedefort then made a further error which was destined to demoralize the entire Templar order for years to come. Rather than fighting to the death, as was the Templar mandate, he was captured and allowed himself to be ransomed by surrendering Gaza to Saladin. Riedefort tried to attack Saladin's forces again a few months later in the Siege of Acre, but this too ended in failure and capture, only this time he was beheaded. The battle marked a turning point in the Crusades, and within the year, the Muslims had retaken Jerusalem. This shook the foundation of the Templars, whose entire reason for being had been to support the efforts in the Holy Land. They attempted to drum up more support among European nobility to return to battle, but after the fallibility shown by Grand Master Gerard de Riedefort, the French withdrew their own support of the war. Without the support of the other countries, even the remarkable leadership of King Richard the Lionheart could not prevail. The Templars suffered loss after loss, such as 1191's Battle of Jaffa. In one disastrous battle in 1244, 348 Templars were wounded, and 312 were killed. Additional crusades, led by Louis IX of France and Edward I of England, were unsuccessful. With each new loss, such as 1250's Battle of Al-Mansura or the 1266 Siege of Safad, Europe had less interest in pursuing the losing battles of the Crusades. The Templars continued to lose more and more land, and after the Siege of Acre in 1291, they were forced to relocate their headquarters to the island of Cyprus. Jacques de Molay, who was to be the last of the order's Grand Masters, took office around 1292. One of his first tasks was to tour across Europe, to raise support for the order and try to organize another crusade. He met the newly invested Pope Boniface VIII, who agreed to grant the Templars the same privileges at Cyprus as they had held in the Holy Land. Charles II of Naples and Edward I also pledged varying types of support, either continuing to exempt the Templars from taxes or pledging future support towards building a new army. In 1298, or 1299 depending which source you look at, the military orders, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, and their leaders including Jacques de Molay, Otten de Grandison, and the Great Master of the Hospitallers briefly campaigned in Armenia in order to fight off an invasion by the Mamluks. They were not successful, and soon the fortress of Roche Guilhem in the Belen Pass, the last Templar stronghold in Antioch, was lost to the Muslims. In the year 1300, the Templars, along with the Knights Hospitaller and forces from Cyprus, attempted to retake the coastal city of Tortosa. They were able to take the island of Arwad near Tortosa, but lost it soon after, and with the loss of Arwald, the Crusaders had lost their last foothold in the Holy Land. Though they still had a base of operations in Cyprus and controlled considerable financial resources, the Order of the Templars became an order without a clear purpose or support, but which still had enormous financial power. This unstable situation contributed to their downfall. The final fall of the Templars may have started over the matter of a loan. The young Philip IV, King of France, also known as Philip the Fair, had needed cash for his war with the English and asked the Templars for more money. They refused. The king assigned himself the right to tax the French clergy, and he tried to get the Pope to excommunicate the Templars, but Pope Boniface VIII refused, instead issuing a papal bull in 1302 to reinforce that the Pope had absolute supremacy over earthly power, even above the king, and then he excommunicated King Philip instead. The king responded by sending his counselor, Guillaume de Nogaret, in a plot to kidnap the Pope from his castle in Anagni in September 1303, charging him with dozens of trumped-up charges, such as sodomy and heresy. The people of Anagni rose up and rescued the aged Boniface VIII, but he died only a month later from shock due to ill treatment. Pope Boniface's successor, Benedict XI, lifted the excommunication of Philip IV, but refused to absolve de Nogaret, excommunicating him and all the other Italian kidnap co-conspirators on June 7, 1304. Benedict died just 8 months later in Perugia, perhaps from poisoning by an agent of de Nogaret. There followed a year of dispute among the French and Italian cardinals as to the next pope, before deciding on the non-Italian Bertrand de Goth, or as he would take the name Clement V, who was a childhood friend of Philip, in June 1305. Clement withdrew the papal bulls of Boniface VIII, which had conflicted with Philip IV's plans. He also created 9 more French cardinals, and after a failed attempt to unite the Templars and the Hospitallers, agreed to Philip IV's demand for an investigation of the Templars. Pope Clement also moved the papacy from the Italian Anagni to the more palatable and controllable French Avignon, initiating the period called the Avignon Papacy, thus starting the Papal Schism, which I also covered in a video, which you can check out if you would like. King Philip, of course, had other reasons to mistrust the Templars, as the organization had declared its desire to form its own state, similar to how the Teutonic Knights had founded Prussia. The Templars' preferred location for this was in the Languedoc of southern France, but they had also made a plan for the island of Cyprus. In 1306, the Templars had supported a coup on that island, which had forced King Henry II of Cyprus to abdicate his throne in favor of his brother, Amalric of Tyre. This probably made Philip particularly uneasy, since just a few years earlier he had inherited land in the region of Champagne, France, which was the Templars' headquarters. The Templars were already a state within a state, where institutionally wealthy, paid no taxes, and had a large standing army which by papal decree could move freely through all European borders, but had no presence in the Holy Land, which left the army with no battlefield. These factors, plus the fact that Philip had inherited an impoverished kingdom from his father, and was already deeply in debt to the Templars, were probably what led to his actions. At dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, scores of French Templars were simultaneously arrested by agents of King Philip, later to be tortured in locations such as the Tower of Chinon, into admitting heresy of the order. Over 100 charges were issued against them, the majority of them identical charges to what had been earlier issued against the inconvenient Pope Boniface VIII, such as accusations of denying Christ, spitting and urinating on the cross, and devil worship. The main interrogation of the Templars was under the control of the Inquisitors, a group of experienced interrogators and clergy who circulated around Europe at the beck and call of any European noble. The rules of interrogation said that no blood could be drawn, but this did not stop the torture. One account told of a Templar who had fire applied to the soles of his feet, such that the bones fell out of his skin. Other Templars were suspended upside down or placed in thumbscrews. Of the 138 Templars, many of them were already old men, that were questioned in Paris over the next few years, 105 of them confessed to denying Christ during the secret Templar initiations. 103 confessed to an obscene kiss being part of the ceremonies, and 123 said they spat on the cross. Throughout the trial, there was never actually any physical evidence of wrongdoing, and no independent witnesses. The only quote-unquote proof was obtained through confessions induced by torture. The Templars reached out to the Pope for assistance, and Pope Clement did write letters to King Philip questioning the arrests, but he took no further action. Despite the fact that every single confession had been produced under duress, they caused a scandal in Paris, with mobs calling for action against the blaspheming order. In response to this public pressure, along with more bullying from King Philip, Pope Clement issued the bull Pastoralis Prae Eminentia, which instructed all Christian monarchs in Europe to arrest all Templars and seize their assets. Most monarchs simply didn't believe the charges, though proceedings were started in England, Iberia, Germany, Italy, and Cyprus, with the likelihood of a confession being dependent on whether or not torture was used to extract it. The dominant view is that Philip, who seized the treasury and broke up the monastic banking system, was jealous of the Templars' wealth and power, and also frustrated by his debt to them, and he sought to control their financial resources for himself by bringing blatantly false charges against them at the Tours Assembly in 1308. It is also likely that, under the influence of his advisors, he actually believed many of the false charges to be true. It is widely accepted that Philip had clearly made up the accusations and did not believe any of the Templars to have been party to such activities. In fact, he had invited Jacques de Molay to be a pallbearer at the funeral of the king's sister on the very day before the arrests. In the end, the arrests caused some shifts in the European economy, from a system of military fiat back to European money, removing this power from church orders. Seeing the fate of the Templars, the Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem and of Rhodes were also convinced to give up banking at this time. In 1312, after the Council of Vienne and under extreme pressure from King Philip IV, Pope Clement V issued an edict officially dissolving the order. Many kings and nobles who had been supporting of the Knights up until that time finally acquiesced and dissolved the orders in their fiefs in accordance with the papal command. Most were not so brutal as the French. In England, many knights were arrested and tried, but not actually found guilty. Much of the Templar property outside of France was transferred by the Pope to the Knights Hospitaller, and many surviving Templars were also accepted into the Hospitallers. In the Iberian Peninsula, where the King of Aragon was against giving the heritage of the Templars to the Hospitallers, the Order of Montesa took Templar assets, and also most of the Templars from the Iberian Peninsula. The order continued to exist in Portugal, simply changing its name to the Order of Christ. This group was believed to have contributed to the first naval discoveries of the Portuguese. Prince Henry the Navigator led the Portuguese order for 20 years until the time of his death. Even with the absorption of Templars into other orders, there are still questions as to what became of all the tens of thousands of Templars across Europe. There had been around 15,000 Templar houses, and an entire fleet of ships. Even in France, where hundreds of Templars had been rounded up and arrested, this was only a small percentage of the estimated 3,000 Templars in the entire country. Also, the extensive archive of the Templars, with detailed records of all of their business holdings and financial transactions, was never found. By papal bull, it was to have been transferred to the Hospitallers, whose library was destroyed in the 16th century by Turkish invaders. Some scholars believe that some of the Templars fled into the Swiss Alps, as there are records of Swiss villagers around that time suddenly becoming very skilled military tacticians. An attack was led by Leopold I of Austria, who was attempting to take control of the St. Gothard Pass, with a force of around 5,000 knights. His force was ambushed and destroyed by a group of about 1,500 Swiss peasants. Up until that point, the Swiss really had no military experience, but after that battle, the Swiss became renowned as seasoned fighters. Some folktales from the period described how there were armed white knights who came to help them in their battles. Little is known about what became of the Templars' fleet of ships. There is a record of 18 Templar ships in the port of La Rochelle, France, on October 12, 1307, the day before Friday the 13th. But the next day, the fleet had vanished. So, in regard to those last couple things, first of all, there are several rumors and speculations that have said that the Knights Templar who fled to the Swiss Alps, or allegedly fled to the Swiss Alps, eventually trained into the elite group, which would be reabsorbed by the Pope as the Swiss Guard. This, of course, has various holes in my opinion, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it, especially considering it wasn't long after this time where the Pope admitted that these charges were all fabricated and lifted all of the, post-mortem punishments on the Templars, such as, the excommunication and their souls being damned to hell and all that stuff. In addition to the whole disappearing fleet, there are various theories, the most prominent of which being that the French took the ships. They didn't disappear, the French just took them and added them to their fleet. But there are many theories out there that a sizable force of Templars was alerted beforehand and were able to make it to the ships and sail away to some unknown location. My theory being either heading back to the Holy Land to, I guess, look for the Holy Grail. I don't know what they would be doing back there, or just joining another knightly order. But those are some rumors, don't really have much to back them up, but I found some speculation here and there on the internet. So, As you may be able to tell, the Templars have an extremely interesting and eventful history from rise to fall, and unlike the other religious knightly orders of the day, which either still exist to this day, or made it at least into the 1800s in one way or another, these ones never made it out of the 1300s. Since then, there have been various groups of people who have tried to restart the Temple Knights, or groups claiming to be descendants of the order. However, none have been recognized by the Church, and most are nothing like the historical Knights Templar. As far as popular culture goes, the Knights Templar are by far the most well-known and represented group of people from the Crusades. However, in most cases, they are usually represented as being the bad guys, almost universally, which is a stark and direct contrast to most historical accounts. I believe that this can be, of course, attributed to an anti-Western or anti-Christian bias that has existed in most media for decades. However, if you enjoyed this video, you would probably enjoy the History Channel show, Nightfall, which despite having a poorly received first season, picks it up in the second season, and covers most of the events I discussed in this video. And honestly, despite some major inaccuracies, it is actually pretty close to true historical account of events. So I recommend checking it out if you haven't already. In any case, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new about this most interesting of topics. But no matter what, as always, have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.